Hello, and welcome back to Literally Literary. If this is your first time joining us, be sure to check out our previous episodes. This episode, we will continue our discussion on Real Life by Brandon Taylor. Last episode, we focused on the first half of the novel. This episode, we will dissect our favorite moments from the second half.
Cool. So we hope all of our listeners are taking care and keeping safe. As Vanessa said, we're going to finish Real Life today. And, we have so many passages, I think, that we're going to try our best to keep it to the usual length of our episodes. I think, we were already taken with this novel in its totality, and, hook, line, and sinker. The beauty of Brandon's words cannot be understated. It's downright poetic. We'll get down to it because we actually have a majority of the novel left. I think, if y'all have a copy starting here on page 144, there's these kinds of passages that I really gravitated toward where he, the narrator, kind of waxes poetic about different things, whether it's memory, love, cruelty, etc. So what for the readers who haven't read it, what's going on here, Vanessa?
So in this moment right here, Wallace is remembering his mother passing away. And he's thinking about this because of the smell of the room.
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of triggers his memory. And I really like the way that this is described because he describes the smell,
Mm-hmm.
and then he just starts describing this memory of his mother.
Yeah. Did you want to read that strong line there?
Okay. Memory sifts. Memory lifts. Memory makes do with what it is given. Memory is not about facts. Memory is an inconsistent measurement of the pain in one's life. But he thinks of her. She falls out of the scent of beer, and he shuts his bedroom door because he cannot bear it.
So, Wallace, our narrator, has been dealing with the death of his father, and now it's, he remembers back the death of his mother from a stroke, or what the doctor said was a stroke. And it's a very accurate, I think, to me, and description, right, of like the way memory operates.
Mm-hmm.
Is first, like you said, right, it's triggered by this scent, and second, that it's not something that is necessarily factual, that it's kind of this, taking in how much pain we have accumulated in our lifetime, and it's kind of like recounting that, and I think there's something that, like, it's scientific, I think, because sometimes when we remember something, we're remembering the memory of us remembering it.
Yeah.
That made a factor. And I think it also speaks to how he's kind of, going through the trauma first, like I said, of his father, and now like remembering back his mother. And I think, he's taking us on this journey that shows us how much hurt he has. What else did you like about that, Vanessa?
I like the way that time elapses. So it's obviously he tells this entire story of his mother,
Mm-hmm.
but not when he flashes back to reality,
Mm-hmm.
it's as if no time has passed at all, kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that that's really interesting, also.
Yeah, and then there's also the memory as like he can't trust it, right? He mentions, and it also kind of shows how not unstable, but he's clearly, in need of someone, right? And it's good to some degree that he has Miller there, but as we'll see, I think, it's gonna get complicated with that. In this chapter, I had another one on 161. Did you have one before that?
I on 158. I just thought this moment was funny. So it's while they're having dinner, and it's a pretty long table because it's about 8 of them that are there. And on the other side of the table, from where Wallace is sitting, is Miller with Zoe and who else?
Emma? Is Emma here and Cole?
Oh, well, I mean, next to Miller.
Oh, okay.
His conversation is with Zoe and Missing by 8. But Wallace hasn't been paying attention to the conversations nearby him. He's been listening in on Miller's conversation. And so at one point he ends up responding to their conversation.
Yeah.
And he's just so embarrassed. And he describes the moment after he answers. He says, they turn to him, as if suddenly aware that he has been listening to their conversation this whole time. He goes back to his plate, tries to tuck himself smaller, but it is too late for that. He has squandered his opening gablet. Miller laughs.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that, right? When you're kind of, thinking about like, where should I listen, right? Because like everyone's having like 4 or 10 conversations or whatever. And there's been tension nevertheless, right, with the friendship here whenever they gather for a seemingly peaceful occasion. Last time there was, and so this time the page after on 160, 161. So this is Roman is here, and we had learned about Roman last time, and Roman kind of just goes off on Wallace, and attacks him for like he says here. I mean, it's just very downright racist, or at the very least microaggressions. He asked at the bottom of 160, because he's being asked like, well, what do you want to do, right? Are you going to stay, or are you going to go, or are you going to quit? And he says, I wouldn't say that I want to leave, but I thought about it. And then Roman asks, why would you do that? I mean, the prospects for Black people, And then Wallace, of course, returns the question, what are the prospects for Black people? And he just kind of keeps going. And then at the end of that conversation, Roman says, if you can't keep up, then for sure you should go. But they brought you in knowing what your deficiencies were. And then Wallace interrupts and says, my deficiencies? Yes, your deficiencies. I won't say what they are. You already know. You come from a challenging background. It's unfortunate, but it is how it is. And then at the bottom, the narrator reflects, what Roman is referring to is instead a deficiency of whiteness, lack of some requisite sameness. This deficiency cannot be overcome. The fact is, no matter how hard he tries or how much he learns, how many skills he masters, he will always be provisional in the eyes of the people, no matter how they might be fond of him or gentle with him. We've had these kinds of conversations about race and whiteness before, quite a lot in our podcast. It just I think it's a very kind of real thing. I don't think it's exaggerated in any way. I think these kinds of conversations happen in public and unashamedly, and it's just a very disturbing thing. And I feel bad that Wallace has to go to something like this. He's already has it hard enough. It's processing the death of his father, and before that his mother, and some other things that we'll get to. What were your thoughts, Vanessa, of that whole encounter?
I could not. I was just reading it. I couldn't stop. I was like, he's not saying this. This is crazy.
Yeah.
I don't know. We do talk about this a lot. I think of like Haley from The Hate You Give.
except that Haley, you can, I mean, not a pass, but you could kind of like, she's still young, so for her, like, there's still enough time to get educated, you know. Of course, there's no excuse for that, but there's a difference there, nevertheless. Um, here with Roman, a grown man, um, and I think, just trying to get under Roman here. I think part of it is like, I think he is being honest. Like, he's not trying to like just put him down because of like some other vendetta. I think he really does think this way. I don't think it's because he wants to get under Wallace's skin. That's the way I read it. Um, so the other thing that I noticed that that Wallace talks about with Miller is that no one really stands up for him.
Yeah.
Like that makes it all the worse. Like, you're amongst friends and like no one is gonna, interfere and put Roman in his place. So it really feels. I think we might have all have had that feeling before, right? Where like someone is putting you on the spot for whatever reason, and like they make fun of you or whatever, or in this case, are outright racist against you, and then like no one speaks up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Plus, tracking his inner thoughts. He's already timid that he's going to be seen as the aggressor by questioning his framing. Right, discrepancies, right? Instead of, he's obviously not. He's just kind of trying to defend himself, and
Right.
so it's weird kind of trying to avoid social awkwardness, I guess, that people do as well.
It also, and I know I sound like a broken record here, but it reminds me a lot of Get Out. I don't know if you already got. Okay, that's a broken record too, but there's that. And then we were talking about memory, Vanessa, and then on 162, the narrator tells us, Emma kind of comforts him, right? But she doesn't really say anything. And then Wallace, we're told, only Wallace will remember it. That's the frustrating part. Wallace is the only one for whom this is a humiliation. That's the other thing, that just makes me so mad.
Yeah.
Right. For everyone else, it's a momentary discomfort, like awkwardness, but for them, it'll pass. For him, it's another memory.
A little after that, Vanessa, I had 166.
Okay.
Did you have something before that?
No.
So it was just the other thing that happens in this like dinner is Roman goes after Wallace. Also, I mean, Vincent goes after him. So first it's Roman, then it's Vincent, because of the whole like wanting, like, Roman putting that idea of his that we talked about last time, that like there could be a third partner that they could have, right, to make it like a more than a monogamous relationship, a non-monogamous relationship. I guess like a polyamory relationship or whatever you want to call it. And so it's Wallace who actually kind of brings it up. Sorry, I misspoke. It's Wallace who brings it up, right? And so Cole, I think he's thinking that Cole brought him to that party because Cole wanted Wallace to confront Vincent about this, about what he just confided to him. And on 167, he says, Wallace does not even try to look innocent of his role in the whole thing. Cole will likely never forgive him, but Wallace did in fact give him what he needed but could never ask for himself. And isn't that why Cole asked him to come in the first place? Yes, he reacted out of pettiness, out of a desire to see someone brought low. but in the end, hadn't something important been achieved? And so this is after kind of Vincent is put on the spot about that, and where he says, can we just have a fucking minute to be in our relationship without you wanting to stick your dick in it? He says crassly, but it's out of that, frustration that he feels about how, he knows about what's going on, right? About how Vincent is like going behind his back and looking at that app. So I just wanted to mention that, that's the other kind of big confrontation. And then I didn't have one until like 188.
Okay, my next one is on 173. So this is after that all happens. And now he's Wallace is talking to Emma. On like towards the middle of the page. He says privacy. So now we understand the concept of privacy, because she's confronting him about bringing up the app about she's upset with him for bringing up Cole and Vincent's relationship. She feels like it wasn't his place, but he turns it around and says it wasn't your place to tell everyone about my father's death.
Right.
So I thought that was really interesting also.
Yeah, and then Emma kind of, right after that quote that you read, Emma says back, retorts, "You're so selfish. I told our friends about your loss to help you. You told everyone about Cole and Vincent's mess to hurt them. It's different." And so that's how she interprets them. I don't know what you thought about that, Vanessa, but I disagree with Emma. I think, going back to the passage that I read, I really do think Wallace was trying to do Cole a favor, because he knew that Vincent and Cole needed to talk about it, and just kind of putting him on the spot. Maybe he should have told him, but I think if he would have told him, Cole would have said, "Don't do it." So that's why he kind of had to do it without telling him, if that makes sense.
I also disagree with Emma, but more from her telling. I mean, from her telling everyone else about Wallace's father.
Right.
I understand why she did it, but I also don't feel like it was her place. I feel like he was going to tell everyone when he was ready, just like he did with Bridget and Miller. Right.
And it's a bigger thing, right? Relationship squabbles, that's to some degree private, of course, but a death in the family is a bigger thing. Yeah. What was your next one?
176 and 177. So they're talking about it having messed up in their projects. And Wallace is saying that this is where Wallace is debating whether he should stay or not, because it's hard and he's behind. And on 177, it says, there were days in all their lives when things went wrong and they were forced to ask themselves if they wanted to go on. Decisions were made every day about what sort of life they wanted, and they always answered the same: only this, only this. But that was the misery of trying to become something, misery that you could put up with because it was native to the act of trying. So I really like that one, because it's like they're working hard towards their goal. Even though it's hard, they know that this is the direction that they have to go for them to be happy with their lives.
Yeah, and this is one of the passages also where, like I said, he waxes very philosophical about, what these kinds of feelings and emotions are. And later on he kind of says, like, he kind of reflects on that, right? And he's like, well, is that what Dana was trying to say? Like, and he's kind of saying to himself, it's different, and then at the bottom of that, he kind of like imagines what would happen. And he says, Emma will shake her head. She will refuse it. She will say that he's pitying himself, that he's not special, that he's not alone in his feeling of inadequacy. And this perhaps is a little truth. And it's that small truth of it that makes it dangerous to him. And then at the bottom it says, she will say, "Get over yourself, Wally." And she will love him and try your best to understand him, and he will accept this, and he will go cry, and she will sense that something has gone wrong, but he will not tell her, and it will be as if nothing has happened at all. I think it's another poignant passage describing the way that people kind of hold in those kinds of emotions because they know it's going to be like too much trouble, right? I mean,
and I definitely feel like Wallace has a lot of those moments where he holds back from saying a lot of things because he plays it in his head of how people are going to respond. And I think it's also very telling of like his relationships with all of these people.
True. Very good point. You know, because you could argue that I think Miller is probably the only one where he kind of feels that comfort, you know, being able to spill his guts, so to speak. 188, or did you have one before that?
No.
So a little later here on 188, so here Wallace is with Miller, and so you know they're kind of they're talking about his dad, how his dad had died, and then he's calling Miller out for like no one said anything, right? Going back to what Roman said, and here it says, there will always be this moment. There will always be good white people who love him and want the best for him. Because Miller says he chickened out. That's why he didn't say anything. But who are more afraid of other white people than of letting him down. It's easier for them to let it happen and to triage the wound later than to introduce an element of the unknown into the situation. No matter how good they are, no matter how loving, they will always be complicit, a danger, a wound waiting to happen. There is no amount of loving that will ever bring Miller close to him in that respect. There is no amount of desire. There will always remain a small space between them, a space where people like Roman will take root and say ugly, hateful things to him. It's a place in every white person's heart where the racism lives and flourishes. Not some vast open plain, but a small crack, which is all it takes. You know, a beautiful reflection on the tragic truth behind, you know, what relationships were that are interracial, and how, well, even if they're not interracial, when, you know, the idea that if you're white, right, that it's always easier to be complicit, it's always easier to stay silent, you know, it goes back to like the importance of like being anti-racist, right? That it's not enough to just to not be racist, you must also be anti-racist, right? It's an active thing, right? It's not a passive thing. So I just found that very, very true, very sad. You know, it makes sense why then Miller, you know, didn't say anything. And like he says there, right, it shows that like in a level of connection, it seems they can't really be that connected, right? If he is white, is what is being argued there. I had one a little later on 202, 203. And I think this is the, okay. Well, this is, so after this, we get chapter 5, which I think is I read it as like a meditation, a Faulknerian chapter, because it's just one long paragraph where he flashes back to what had happened. So what did you think of this chapter, Vanessa, and how it's kind of, you know, it's in the middle of the novel, and, you know, it's just one long stream of consciousness from the narrator?
I really like the way that this chapter is introduced. So this, essentially what this is a conversation or a monologue, I guess, from him to Miller. Because Miller is telling him, I want to know your story. I want to know who you are, where you're from, like all of it. And so then what follows is this chapter, and he just talks about his life in Alabama, his parents, the first boy he liked, his grandparents, and religion. So all of that is packed into like 6 pages.
Mm-hmm. And it reminded me a lot of James Baldwin too, because James Baldwin also talks about a lot about the relationship of religion to oneself, one's personal self. So what is it that you found important or wanted to highlight in this chapter specifically?
So in the first half, we talked about this friend of his parents that stayed in the house.
Mm-hmm.
So he talks about this again in more detail. And it's interesting to see the way his mother responds to what happened
Mm-hmm.
and her catching this man in her son's bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
And he also reflects on why she reacted the way that she did.
Mm.
And that's on page 200.
Mm-hmm.
Called me, okay, it says, called me sissy, called me everything except son, said everything except I'm sorry that happened to you. But then she had no language for such thing, no language for apologies, for cruelty, because she had been made that way. Because my brother's father was not my father. Because my brother's father had done that to her. Caught her on the way home from school one day in the kudzu and dragged her down, pulled her down with him, and climbed on top of her like a common beast. And then later on it says, she told me that he raped her. She told me that she hadn't wanted children. And her mother, my grandmother, told me that my mother had wanted it, that she had deserved it, that she got what she had coming. So it's not surprising that on that day she threw him from my bed. She slapped me and told me that it was my fault.
Yeah, it's a very difficult thing to read. And it has a lot, like you said, packed into it, right? There's the part about how there's victim shaming, right, from her part, and then how her grandmother did the same thing. And it's kind of like this the sins of the fathers here, right? Because it's being passed down to him after it was passed down to her. There's also the homophobia, that you read at the beginning. That shows again why it explains why he was feeling that way about his father. But now we get that even his mother was this way, right? And there was that complicity of someone who was just coming in and raping him, like she herself was raped. What did you think of that, Vanessa, the passage you just read?
So I really like that comparison of her reaction to the reaction she got.
Mm-hmm.
Because, and it happens a lot through this novel, he does that. He analyzes people. And I think it's so fascinating to be able to read how he's reading these people in his life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And his own divulging this kind of trauma also goes into on the following page. He ends up, as might not be surprising, right? He is suicidal. He mentions how when or he has suicidal thoughts. When the moment happens, he mentions, I wanted to get out of my skin. And then he wet his fingers some more and put more inside me, and the bed was creaking. And I wanted to die every moment of it. I wanted to die, could feel myself going further and further away from myself, shrinking and shrinking, sinking like a stone, heavier all the time, downward through some vast inner ocean. So it's a very it's a very painful thing, obviously, literally, in terms of the fact that now it's a memory for him. And you mentioned Miller, and I think it kind of I don't know if like discussing this, opening up to Miller about this is something that can necessarily be therapeutic, only because I think like it's painful, there's pain here, and just recounting that pain in and of itself opens up more wounds to some degree. But later on, there's a passage where Ravema Like he kind of just breaks down, if you remember. Did you also have the end of that chapter? Or
The bottom of 202 going into 203 is what I had.
Yeah, what was it?
Okay, so this is kind of talking about his reflections on religion. And he says, I didn't know much about God and the devil, except what you shouldn't do to invite one or the other. But I knew that I had to be full of one, that I wanted to be full of one. And if it couldn't be the one I wanted, then I would take the other. That if God wanted nothing to do with me, then I take the devil. I take him on my knees where I've taken the men, let him pull me down in a bed of kudzu and fuck me, so long as I wasn't empty anymore.
What did you think about that? Him, you mentioned his relationship to God, right? And how he was kind of brought up that way in Alabama. But here he's kind of, it's that rejection, right?
I think he's been reflecting on what his grandparents told him, and that how he felt was wrong, and that God wouldn't want him. And so he's kind of accepting this. He says, this is who I am.
It's a very important epiphany too, because that recognition, it's kind of like, his family doesn't have his back. And then if his family is religious, right, then how can there be room for me? And again, it reminds me of Ben Sines and Everything Begins and Ends at the Kentucky Club. The first story he has gone to be with the woman talks about how the characters who were gay also didn't feel that they were accepted in the church. And it's interesting as well, I think, metaphorically, Vanessa, in how he sexualizes that too. And again, going back to like, well, his gay identity is intimately intrinsically tied to his self, right? Like he can't take that apart, and that's why he makes this decision. Did you also have the bottom of that? Because I did too.
Well, I didn't have anything to say about it, but I did like the last line in the chapter.
I like it a little above that, where he kind of reflects. It's very Baldwinian about how you have to let go. Faulknerian too, in a way. There comes a time when you have to stop being who you were, when you have to let the past stay where it is, frozen and impossible. You have to let it go if you're going to keep moving, if you're going to survive, because the past doesn't need a future. It has no use for what comes next. The past is greedy, always swallowing you up, always taking. If you don't hold it back, if you don't dam it up, it will spread and take and drown. The past is not a receding horizon. Rather, it advances one moment at a time, marching steadily forward until it has claimed everything and we become again who we were. We become ghosts when the past catches us. I can't live as long as my past does. It's one or the other. What did you, since you also highlighted, what did you think of that?
I think it's interesting that he feels like in order to be himself, he has to erase all of his past. When in all actuality, his past is what led him to where he is now, I feel.
Yeah, like in other words, are you saying that like those traumatic moments that he has had has made him who he is, like in a way that he can't remove that part of himself, and that therefore he would, like, he wouldn't be who he is, right, if it wasn't for all of that.
Right. Yeah. Like they shaped him and they changed who he is.
Yeah, I think so too. And I think, going back to how we started this discussion about memory, I think it's also shows, nevertheless, like his recognition that he can't, that if he does dwell on this too much, though, like he says, right, that he's gonna drown.
Yeah.
And so I think, it reminds me of if y'all have seen The Last Jedi, there's that line from Kylo Ren, let the past die, kill it if you have to. Which is kind of interesting if you juxtapose it with what Faulkner would say, which is The past is never dead. It's not even past. Um, because in this sense, he does kind of think that he does have to kill it. It's the only way he can stay alive, right? And then later on, Miller comes in, and Miller confesses to him something. Basically, that Miller got in a fight with someone and pretty much beat him to a pulp. Um, I don't know if you had a passage around there, Vanessa.
On what page?
Like the two 10s, 220s?
No.
I just had this one on 229 where Wallace reflects, did Miller really almost kill someone? Bring his cracking bones down on someone because he didn't know what to do with himself? Anger could be like that, moving from person to person like an illness or a plague. And then on the next page, he's talking about the friendship, and he says, perhaps friendship is really nothing but controlled cruelty. Maybe that's all they're doing, lacerating each other and expecting kindness back. Or maybe it's just Wallace lacking an understanding of how friendship works. But he understands cruelty. He understands violence, even if friendship is beyond him. I think it's really interesting how given Wallace's past, right, cruelty is something that comes natural to him. Like he can recognize it, he can spot it from a mile away. But friendship, unfortunately, he does not. And I think that goes to show the kind of complex relationships, right, that he has with the people who are supposed to be close to him. Miller kind of then a little later on, like he kind of goes after him for like, I spilled my guts to you, and he kind of expected more, but I had one on 243.
Okay.
Where he says, Miller wants to talk to him about the whole Vincent incident. And at the bottom, Wallace is adamant that he does not want to talk about it. And I don't think he's being passive aggressive. I think he just really does not want to talk about it. He says, I cannot have this conversation again. And he says, I can't. And the narrator kind of points out the truth here. It is perhaps the truest thing he has said all morning. The refusal to go forward, to repeat the pattern, to let himself be folded up into this language that robs the world of all its honesty. He does not want to get swallowed up by it again, by this way of looking at things without looking at them. So it is kind of interesting how, he's getting more intimate with Miller, but he's still kind of unable to open up about some things, right? Some of the hurt that he has inside. Did you have something in this chapter, like 240?
No.
No. I just had the end of this chapter, 246. I really like this one as well because there's a lot of references to real life, right? What is real life? Going back to, of course, the title. And he's just kind of walking down the street, and then he sees people there shopping and things like that. And he says, this too is real life, not merely the accumulation of tasks, things to be done and sorted, but also the bumping up against other lives, everything in the world insignificant. And then at the bottom, the world spins, the week is ahead of him. If he advances toward it, marching ever closer, will it swallow him? Till the sound of his weight traversing is absorbed into its bulk, his life no more discernible from the outside than the lives of others on the street are to him. This passage reminded me a lot of Cormac McCarthy, and how he's kind of able to zoom out. I think it's a beautiful thing that Brandon does here in this novel throughout. After that, we get chapter 7. What did you have from here, Vanessa?
Mine isn't until page 257.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So this is So he gets an email from Simone, right? This is
wasn't it Dana though? Dana that sent it
yeah.
to
Well,
yeah.
no, it's Simone.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so Dana sends an email to Simone
Yes.
about her conversation with Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And now Simone has called Wallace into her office, and this is their conversation.
Right.
Okay. And this is another moment where we see that Wallace is like holding back from saying what he wants to say.
Mm-hmm.
So in the middle of the page, it says, he could say what Dana said to him. He could say that she is a racist homophobic. He could say any of the things he has wanted to say since he came here. About how they treat him, about how they look at him, about what it feels like when the only people who look like him are the janitors, and they regard him with suspicion. He could say 1,000,000 things, but he knows that none would matter. None of it would mean anything to her, to any of them, because she and they are not interested in how he feels except as it affects them. Yeah, so he doesn't try to defend himself when so Simone tells him, I can't have a misogynist in my lab, Wallace.
Mm-hmm.
And so rather than defend himself, he kind of just doesn't respond.
Mm-hmm.
And she just tells him to really consider if he really wants to stay in the program.
Mm-hmm. He's really torn down, right? Like it's not just Dana, it's not just Simone. Simone, we already knew, right? She was the quote unquote she demon. But going back to just what happened, right? With Miller and with Vincent and with Roman. So it's this compounding things, right? Like one other thing to think about. And so I think it's very easy to understand why he just says, I don't know, right? Like he could easily say, well, not easy. He could say like, yes, I still want to be in the program. But you can see why, he has been stripped of all his confidence. He has been stripped of pretty much everything that he holds dear, except perhaps for Miller. But even with Miller, right, like he had that fear opening up. And so it totally makes sense why he would react this way. What did you think of that, like with the way that Simone confronts him and thinking about this in an academic setting?
I think it's surprising that no one's able to see that he's really struggling. And rather than offering him help, they're like, oh, so you're thinking of leaving? Just because he's not putting in the same amount of effort, I guess, that he normally was.
Mm-hmm.
And he's really falling behind. And they're like, oh, so you don't really want this then?
Mm-hmm.
Rather than being like, hey, are you okay?
Right. Yeah, it goes to show how, we talked about this the first episode, but how toxic academia can be. That work environment, right? Where like you always have to be like it's kind of like a badge of honor to be overworked.
Produce.
Yeah, and that some it's very capitalistic in some sense, right? That like if you aren't putting out articles or if you're not keeping busy, you're doing something wrong. And that is why I think a lot of people burn out. I know at least a couple people personally who have dropped out of PhD programs because of advisors like Simone, who aren't supportive, who aren't looking out for the mental health of grad students and PhD students. So yeah, I think you hit it right on the head there, Vanessa, that, she is very accusatory and doesn't really let him defend himself. And right away jumps to that conclusion, right? That, well, you should really think about whether you belong here, right? It's hard enough for him to belong as a Black man, right? In the Midwest. So yeah, more problems for him. And he reflects on that a little later on. I don't know if you have 268 or something before it.
No.
So this is where he kind of opens up to Emma about it, about his father. He's still thinking about his father, right? He still got him on his mind. And he remembers back here that time in Alabama after the man left his house. Wallace cried. His father stopped and grabbed him around the waist, and he asked, "What are you crying for? What are you crying for?" The reason seemed obvious to Wallace, but the more his father asked him, the more Wallace questioned why he was crying. His father had done some magic trick, converted certainty to doubt, with no more effort than it took to ask, "What are you crying for?" But here with Bridget, the reason sharpens, its clarity terrifying. He is crying because he cannot recognize himself, because the way forward is obscured for him, because there is nothing he can do or say that will bring him happiness. He is crying because he is lodged between this life and the next, and for the time he does not know whether it is better to stay or go. Wallace cries and cries until eventually he is hollow and empty, and there is nothing left to cry about. So he's really in a dark place here, and he has finally it seems he has this breakdown, right? Mental breakdown, and you know, everything kind of coming back to him about the trauma that he has experienced, when he was with his father and the father's friend, who would rape him. And it seems this kind of catharsis, right, for him crying makes him recognize that he like it says here, right, that he is feeling empty. And I think it also shows his vulnerability, because his father lashes out at him, right, for crying. But here he's kind of crying, and of course Bridget isn't going to tell him not to cry. So I don't know, it's just a really touching moment for me, where he is kind of finally seems like it had built up inside. A couple pages after that, on 270 and 271, there's this set of passages where he's talking about sex and what does it mean. He says there's sex in the mind, and that which follows from the identification of the objects of sexual potential. And a little later on 271, he's also very embodied here, in the sense that, like, he's talking about the relationship he has with his own bodies, and he says, "How to wrangle the body that is unreal, the history of our bodies, which are inseparable from the bodies themselves and are always growing. Wallace is unwell. Parts of him are falling off. When he sees a good body, he finds he's unable to look away. The truly awful thing about beauty is that it reminds us of our limits. Beauty is a kind of unrelenting cruelty. It takes the truth, honest to a terrifying keenness, and uses it to slice us to the bone." And I just say wow a lot when I read these passages and reread them, because we always hear beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? But it's just so interesting how the narrator sees beauty here, right? That it's just kind of a reflection of our own limitations, right? And I don't know, I just wanted to highlight that another kind of very poetic passage. He feels very insecure, right? Because this passage, also the paragraph before, like, he wasn't able to get hard when he was trying to think of something, right, to make him hard. And so it shows how he kind of is very torn down and very insecure in his own body, and I think it's just a very honest kind of reckoning that he has. And I didn't have one till 292.
Okay, you can go ahead. Mine's on 310.
Okay. So I think what has already happened, correct me if I'm wrong, but Miller goes off on him, did this, right?
Yes.
And he refers to himself as like the wolf in sheep's clothing, or the wolf, and like the three little bears who you led inside, because he it goes back to what I said, that like he confessed something to him, to Wallace, about him being violent, and again, the way that people do not respond well, I think, is a big theme in this novel. And Wallace recognizes him. You're a wolf, right? He finally says, because like he's got his he's like choking him. And then he says here, talking about pain. What does Miller make of him? Wallace wonders. Can Miller see his hurt the way Wallace can see his? Seeing pain requires a correlate if you are selfish. Does Miller have a correlate for Wallace's pain? Arranged and waiting for a conduit? Cruelty, Wallace thinks, is really just the conduit of pain. It conveys pain from one place to another, from the place of highest concentration to the place of lowest confrontation. In the same way heat flows, it is a delivery system, as in the way that certain viruses convey illness, disease, irreparable harm. They're all infected with pain, hurting each other. I think it's to me another beautiful reflection on what pain is, that the way pain travels, that it's kind of like, if it is like heat, right, it's kind of doing harm that not just to yourself but to others, because you're kind of transferring it just like you transfer heat. And so, because both of them have a lot of pain here at this point, so I think it makes sense why, I don't know if you were kind of thrown off by the way that Miller just attacks them, right?
Yeah.
But it kind of does make sense when you think about how the narrator is reflecting on like the pain that they are both feeling, the need for a correlate. You said you had one on what page?
310.
Okay, well, I know I keep reading.
Go ahead.
I just had this. I had that page too, and then my last one though was on page 300. This is again, Wallace reiterates that he doesn't like talking about those things, that he doesn't like opening up, right? He says, I think that's the difference between us. You want to talk about it, and I don't see the point. Here he's talking about, on page 300, who's he talking about here? Sorry, I lost my...
Okay. So he's talking about his dad. And a couple pages before this, he's talking about how when his parents, I guess, split up, his father moved out and he told him that he didn't want to see him anymore and basically cut off communication without any explanation, even though Wallace knew that he was 5 minutes up the road. He just never really saw him again after that.
Yeah, and thank you for providing that context. And I just wanted to highlight it because it shows how much more hurt his father was able to rub on that wound, right? Not only with his dad's friend, the rapist, but here, right, just kind of abandoning him. And he says here, I'll never know why. He was right, it didn't matter why. There was nothing I could have done to change his mind. There was nothing anyone could have done. It doesn't matter why he did it, just that he did. And the world went on. It always does. He's sounding Miller here. The world doesn't care about you or me or any of this. The world just keeps on going. And then he says, it doesn't matter. Going back to the incident, I can't change the thing I'd like to change. I can't rewind things. I can't erase them. I can't take it back. It doesn't matter. You did it. It's a part of us now. It's a part of our history. You can't pick it up and throw it back like a fish you caught. You can't replace it. It's just there. It's permanent. I think it's a really interesting perspective that it in many ways rings true, but it goes to show how he has a kind of fatalism about him, in the philosophical sense of like it's over and done with. We can't do anything about it, and I think it's not that helpful, honestly, to Wallace, because I think he does need to open up to Miller, and Miller is, I think, genuinely wanting to comfort him. So I just wanted to highlight that and how they kind of don't see eye to eye on that. You said you had 310?
Yes. This one goes back to like the whole academia that we were talking about.
Mm-hmm.
And he's comparing society to the fish because he's cooking fish.
Mm-hmm.
He's comparing them to the fish at the pier, and I mean the people at the pier
Mm-hmm.
that he described earlier.
Hmm.
So the tilapia that he's cooking is like the people at the pier who
Mm-hmm.
he describes as bloated and commercial and with so little desire in life except to see the next day. Nothing except the pure biology of it all, the part of life that must, by necessity, resist death, linking day upon day upon day, time meaningless like water.
You mentioned this pre-show that the metaphor you wanted to highlight, right, of him comparing life to fish.
Oh yeah. So he's comparing the people on the pier to this tilapia because the life that these tilapia have is they're essentially breeded or bred. Sorry. It's so embarrassing.
No.
They're bred to be eaten. So they're not really, I guess, living their lives. They're specifically to be eaten.
Right.
And so that's how he's seeing these people, that they just live without any purpose, like these fish.
Yeah. Right. And then later on, right, he says, like, it's about accepting the futility to blend in. You know, it's life spent swimming against the gradient, struggling up the channel of other people's cruelty. And in a way, someone could say that's kind of cynical, but I think he's kind of also accurate, you know, because like it does feel kind of hopeless the way that, you know, going back to Simone, right? This passage kind of starts with Simone, you know, what he calls the dark water of real life. Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting analogy, and you know, this eventually leads to the flashback, right? So the book ends with a flashback.
Oh wait, I have one more. Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
On page 312. This goes back to what we were talking about with like memory. And so up until this point, we've heard all negative memories about his father. And I think it's really interesting because what triggers this memory is cooking and food. So it says, the fish tastes good, hot, buttery, smooth, salt and pepper, and a little vinegar, which was his father's secret. In those years, they all lived together. His father did all the cooking, and his mother worked. In those years, his father cooked for him all manner of delicious foods. In those years, his father soothed him with food, with pink-dyed pickled eggs, or sliced strawberries, or mango, or papaya. His father introduced him to all sorts of furry, sour fruits. As they sat together on the rickety porch in the summer sun, their skin turning the color of clay, eating off paper plates. How has Wallace forgotten this? And so I thought that was really interesting that he's able to not only remember the bad things, but he's able to see the good things and understand that he did learn things from his father at the same time.
Yeah, I thought it was an interesting revelation too. You know, there's first the gender role reversal, right? That it's the mom who's working and the father who's being the stay-at-home dad. And two, I think what you said about memory, right? That you know, it's him eating this fish that he's able to remember this, right? And he wonders, you know, why did I forget this? I think that shows the way that the memory works. I think it also, to zoom out a little more, we've talked about food a lot, well, not a lot, but a fair amount in this podcast and the other works. And I think it shows again the power that food contains, not just in its deliciousness and how it brings people together, but it's able to help you have these nostalgic moments and recollecting, you know, the way things were. And it kind of takes him out of, you know, he's like zoning out, right? And then Miller asks him, "You're a million miles away," and then Wallace replies, I'm here in the world." Yeah. And so then, we end with chapter 10. And so I misspoke. I said 9 chapters the first episode, but there's 10. What did you like about the flashback here to the moment when everyone first met, when he first arrived to this place in the Midwest, which isn't specified?
I really enjoyed it because it shows how fresh he is into like this experience and how he seems so happy in comparison to the way he seems throughout the novel, kind of like just going through the motions as best as he can. Here he's really excited to be starting and meeting his new friends, and he's like, "Oh, these are my friends." So I really enjoyed seeing his initial start to the program.
Yeah, me too. I think there's a certain innocence and sweetness in how everyone is like saying hi. They're all being nice to each other, right? There's camaraderie, and I think you had the ending there, right? And you wanted to connect it to something.
Yeah. So I'll read. It's the last paragraph in the novel. It says, "To life," they said, imbuing those words with all their hope and all their desires for the future. Their laughter rang through the night and through the trees, and on the shore they had left behind. People were eating dinner and laughing and crying and going about things as they always had and always would. So this paragraph really reminded me of Raymond Carver and what we talk about when we talk about love, and just the way that people interact and the energy that's there.
The toast that they're having is very, like you said, earlier, it's very hopeful. It's a very hopeful moment, right? Very optimistic, very cheerful. The dinners and toasts that they have before, right, have been fraught with tension, and it's like the one peaceful one, right? And yeah, definitely, Raymond Carver. It reminded me also of James Joyce's The Dead, which is also like a dinner. It's even like, Great Gatsby, right? Because of so many images of water. Very meditative in that regard. That life just kind of goes on, right? So I don't know if you all had any final thoughts, but I was blown away by this novel. I really do hope it is the winner of the Booker, but even if it doesn't, I really cannot recommend it enough to readers and listeners out there. Pick up a copy at your local bookstore or anywhere online. Did you have any last things to say, you guys?
No, I think you got it. Thanks for joining us on this week's episode discussing Real Life by Brandon Taylor. And if you haven't read it, we hope we inspire you to pick up a copy. Be sure to also check out next month's book, Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. Follow us on Instagram at literallyliterary.ep and on Twitter at literallylit.ep.